Welcome to the silent personalities. Washington didn't just fight the British with muskets and soldiers. He fought them with secrets. While the world watched armies clash on open battlefields, Washington was building something far more dangerous, a hidden intelligence network operating inside enemy territory, a spy system so secret, so well organized, that even today most people don't realize it helped decide the fate of American independence. George Washington is usually remembered as a battlefield commander and the first U.S. president, but one of his most underrated characteristics was how seriously he treated intelligence. He understood something most generals of his time ignored. If you can see what the enemy is planning before they move, you can win wars with fewer soldiers, fewer bullets, and fewer sacrifices. That's why, when the British held New York City as their main headquarters, Washington didn't just try to fight them head-on, he tried to outthink them. And that's where his spy network, later known as the Culper Spy Ring, became a silent weapon that helped keep the American Revolution alive. New York City was the perfect place for British power. It had officers, ships, money, supplies, and constant movement of information. Washington's army, meanwhile, was often short on food, gunpowder, clothing, and trained troops. If he guessed wrong, one bad decision could destroy the revolution. So he needed a way to know, where are British troops moving next? Which ships are leaving the harbor? Are they planning to attack Washington's army, or cut off supplies, or capture key leaders? In short, Washington needed reliable, regular, inside information, not rumors, not someone heard, but intelligence he could act on. The genius of the Culper system was that it wasn't one hero spy doing everything. It was a chain, a network designed to survive danger. If one person was caught, the whole system wouldn't necessarily collapse. Washington and his intelligence chief, Benjamin Talmadge, structured it so that information could move from British-occupied New York to Washington's headquarters through multiple hands, people who looked ordinary, merchants, riders, bowmen, and locals who blended into daily life. The point was simple: the best spy is the one who doesn't look like a spy. Here's how it worked in real life. A source inside New York, someone who could quietly observe British plans, would collect details that sounded boring but were actually deadly. What regiments were gathering, what supplies were being loaded, which generals were meeting, what ships were preparing to sail. That information then had to be transferred out of the city without getting the source arrested. So the network used trusted couriers and carefully timed routes, often passing information through Long Island and across the water to safe areas where Washington's people could receive it, because carrying a letter could be a death sentence. They used tradecraft spy techniques that feel modern even today. They relied on aliases and coded names, so if a letter was captured, it wouldn't immediately expose identities. They used numeric codes for names and places, so instead of writing Washington or New York, they could use numbers. That way, even if a British officer read the message, it might look like meaningless figures unless they had the code book. One of the most cinematic elements was their use of invisible ink, sometimes called sympathetic stain. Imagine a normal letter that looks like casual talk. How is the family? Business is slow. The weather is fine. But between those harmless lines, the real message is written in invisible ink. To any British checkpoint, it's just a boring letter. To the American reader, it's a military report. When the proper chemical is applied, hidden writing appears, revealing troop movements or urgent warnings. This was not just a cool trick, it was survival. It allowed intelligence to move in plain sight while reducing the risk of immediate exposure. They also used methods like dead drops away to pass messages without meeting face to face. Instead of handing the letter directly to a courier, which could be witnessed, the spy might hide it in a prearranged spot, under a rock, inside a hollow fence post, in a buried container, or tucked where only the next person would think to look. This minimized contact and reduced the chance that one arrest would expose everyone else. Washington didn't treat spying as extra. He treated it as a core military function. He constantly pushed for better intelligence, faster delivery, and stronger secrecy. He wanted reports to be specific, not vague fear, but details he could use: numbers, dates, locations, the kind of facts that change decisions. And he was realistic. He knew spies were human, networks could fail, and information could be wrong. So he valued consistency, multiple reports over time. That built a reliable picture of British behavior. The real power of this spy network wasn't just that it gave Washington secrets, it gave him options. If he knew an enemy plan early, he could avoid a trap. If he knew ships were leaving, he could reposition forces or protect supplies. If he learned the British were expecting an attack somewhere, he could shift strategy and strike differently. Even when the Americans couldn't win by strength, intelligence helped them win by timing and positioning. Now, one part of the Culper story gets exaggerated online: the mysterious figure known as Agent 355. Many people present it like a confirmed identity of famous female spy with a complete biography. In reality, it's more accurate to treat Agent 355 as a historical mystery. The code number is often associated with lady in the Culper code system, but the true identity is not proven beyond doubt. For a documentary, that uncertainty is actually a strength. You can present it as suspense. You can say, Washington's network likely relied on people who could move through British social spaces where officers talked to freely, and some of those sources may have been women whose contributions were intentionally hidden or never fully recorded. The mystery itself shows how secrecy works. Sometimes history can't name the hero, because the hero's safety depended on silence. If you want the strongest documentary angle, the key message is this: Washington's spy network shows that leadership isn't only about bravery in public. It's also about discipline in private building systems, protecting people, thinking long-term, and accepting that the most important work is sometimes invisible. Washington's army didn't always have the best weapons or the most soldiers, but Washington built something the British didn't fully see: a steady flow of intelligence from behind enemy lines. And in a war where one wrong move could end everything, that hidden stream of secrets helped keep the revolution alive until victory became possible. Even more impressive is that Washington's intelligence system wasn't built on luck. It was built on discipline. He demanded that messages be written carefully, that agents stay calm under pressure, and that everyone involved understand one rule: never reveal more than necessary. That rule is what made the Culper Ring so difficult for the British to destroy. If a courier was caught, he might only know the name of the person who gave him the message, not the identity of the original source. If a letter was intercepted, it might contain coded numbers instead of names. And if the British tortured someone for answers, the damage could still be limited. Washington wasn't just building spies, he was building a system designed to survive failure. And the danger was real. British authorities didn't treat spies as prisoners of war. They treated them as criminals. If you were caught spying, there was no mercy. There was no trial that would save you. The punishment was often public hanging, meant to scare everyone else into silence. Washington knew this, and yet he still relied on these people. That alone tells you how important intelligence was to him, because he believed that without information, the revolution would collapse under the weight of British power. What made the Culper Ring especially effective was that it operated inside the most heavily controlled environment in America. New York City was packed with British soldiers, loyalist supporters, and informants. Taverns were watched, letters were opened, strangers were questioned, and yet, right in the middle of this, Washington's agents were able to gather critical information by blending into society. They didn't look like warriors. They looked like normal citizen shopkeepers, businessmen, travelers. They listened quietly. They asked simple questions. They observed patterns, and they reported everything. One of the smartest parts of the network was how it used ordinary life as camouflage. For example, Robert Townsend, one of the key members of the Ring, worked in New York City and had access to British circles through business connections. That meant he could hear things soldiers didn't even realize were valuable. Officers would talk freely around people they believed were harmless civilians. Plans would be discussed casually. Rumors would spread from one table to another. And in a city full of gossip, Townsend could separate meaningless talk from real military information. He became, in many ways, Washington's hidden eyes inside enemy headquarters. And that's what makes the Culper Spy Ring so powerful. It wasn't just a clever trick. It wasn't just a side story of the revolution. It was a hidden battlefield, one where the weapons were not cannons or rifles, but coded numbers, invisible ink, and ordinary people brave enough to risk everything without ever being recognized. Because in George Washington's world, one intercepted letter could destroy an entire network. One mistake could lead to execution.